morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. VPNs, Virtual Private Networks. Most of the time that we encounter these, it's in a business context. I have seen VPNs, sort of VPNs, used in gaming contexts. I think it probably used to be more popular before services like Steam and online matchmaking became just a basic part of the networking landscape. But most of the time, you're still going to encounter this in a business context. There's lots of different ways that you can do VPNs. There's different protocols for this. Some of the more common ones are IPSec, L2TP. Some appliances have an SSL VPN that you can use. But one of the newest and most performant solutions is called WireGuard. Now, WireGuard is what I recommend, certainly for friends and family. In a business context, sometimes. WireGuard itself is actually just a VPN protocol. It's what's the underlying foundation that makes the connection work. It is not a full-featured VPN client. If you want things like two-factor authentication or single sign-on with your Office 365 account or Google Workspace or what have you, there are VPN providers or VPN clients that can do those things. Some of them might even use WireGuard as the actual underlying tunnel. But WireGuard itself doesn't offer those features. That being said, like I said, it's something that I would recommend very much for friends and family. And anytime I can build a VPN using WireGuard, that's usually my preference because of how performant it is. I am going to show you today how to get that set up in OPNsense. I've got a demo OPNsense machine here that I just set up, brand spanking new, and I'm going to walk you through how we can get a WireGuard instance set up. The goal for today is to just define a WireGuard interface on the router and then define one WireGuard client that will be allowed access to one specific address in our routed network, in our LAN, as it were. Got that? Yeah, I'm not 100% sure I've got it. I know how to do it. The scenario for this is something actually requested by a friend. They're like, well, you know, I really kind of want to know how to do this. And I went, sure, let's get started. How are we doing this? Well, right from the very get-go, in a current version of OPNsense, WireGuard is one of the VPN solutions that's already built in right out of the box, which makes it really convenient. If we go to instances, you'll see there's nothing there. Let's go ahead and make there be something there. I'm going to call this my WireGuard VPN. Instance 0 is fine. I'm just going to click that to create a key pair. This is a key point of the key pairs. There's a private half and a public half. Everything in WireGuard is using a key pair. The public half goes to the remote system. The private half stays yours. Listen port. What am I going to do for a WireGuard listening port? I'm just going to go 13,000 for demonstration purposes. Tunnel address. My LAN on this test device is 192.168.224. So instead, I'm going to do 225.1. And I'm going to say it's a /24. Okay, cool. And if you didn't see, I just clicked outside of the box to make it turn into this highlighted portion. And I don't have any peers yet. Cool. That should be all I need to do for that. Ah, no spaces. Right, of course. There we go. And I will apply those settings. Hey, presto. We have WireGuard, but it's not enabled yet. Let's make sure we enable it. That'll probably help. This instance now exists, but if you try to connect to it, it won't work. It won't be reachable. There's a few more things that we need to do to make this properly reachable. The listening port is 13,000. Okay, well, what we need to do is go to our WAN rules. Right now, nothing coming in from outside is going to be able to reach anything. So we want to make sure that we pass UDP. WireGuard only uses UDP, so that's the only thing you need to forward. From any destination is this firewall. Or you could do this firewall, or you could just do the WAN address. If you do this firewall, then even people coming in from inside can connect to your WireGuard instance. Maybe that's useful for you, maybe not. I'm just going to go with WAN address in this case. And the port range will be 13,000. I got to put it over here too. There we go. Just call it that. There we go. Okay. So anything coming in destined for the WAN address on port 13,000 is permitted inbound. Cool. It's not being forwarded anywhere. It's just being permitted through the firewall so that OPNsense can actually receive it and people can connect to your WireGuard instance. All right. You'll notice under the rules here, there's this WireGuard group. This section affects all WireGuard connections. All of them. If you go back to VPN and WireGuard, the fact that we have one instance here doesn't mean that we couldn't create another different instance for a different class of connections. At my workplace, I have one endpoint for staff VPN access, and then I have another for automated device access for devices that I need to keep connected from outside of the network so that I can send them commands, for example. I want different policies for these interfaces, so I have them on separate interfaces. But if they're on separate interfaces, then your rules, again, this can only apply to the entire group. So how are you going to be able to set up different settings, different rules? What we do is we go up to interfaces, assignments. You'll see that you've got a WireGuard interface that can actually be assigned. So if I do this and call this WireGuard _ VPN, add. There we go. Now I've got this as a separate interface. And if I save that, I've got WireGuard VPN. Here it is. Let's enable it. I'm not going to block anything private. I am going to give it a static IP address, which we said was 192.168.225.1/24. Okay. And everything else here is good. No, you can't assign an IP configuration type to a tunnel interface. This is my habits kicking in again, isn't it? None. There we go. Because the IP address is actually defined here in WireGuard interfaces. It's not in the interfaces section. Still has an IP address though. But the big point of that is now when you go to rules, you've got an interface specifically for WireGuard VPN. Perfect. That's exactly what you want. If you have group rules, those might also apply, but the interface specific rules will override or apply in addition to the group rules. I don't remember the exact order in which they apply, but I typically leave the group empty and put whatever I want on the actual interface. Cool. So now we have a WireGuard instance. We've assigned it to an interface. We've also permitted access through the firewall to our WireGuard instance. Now let's look at configuring a peer. If we go down to VPN, WireGuard, we have this wonderful handy dandy section for peers. There's nothing there right now, but we also have peer generator. If you have multiple instances, you can choose which instance you want to be configuring. And you can see that it's already got some information here in a big QR code. A public key and a private key. This is going to be from the client's perspective. So the client's public key is what we will want to save. No, that's not what's going to happen. This public key is actually of our instance. Full disclosure, I have not used the peer generator before. I usually have a template file that I just slap in the appropriate information. But the peer generator is here, it works. So this public key, LKIE, is the public key of our instance. That's what has to go to the peer's public key, LKIE, because the client needs to know our public key so that it can connect to it. This private key is going to be the client's private key, and you can see that down here. The client's public key is what will get saved to OPNsense so that OPNsense can identify it. Yeah, I understand that it's really confusing. OPNsense keeps its private key, sends its public key over here. Client has its private key and OPNsense's public key. Then the client sends its public key over to OPNsense. It's confusing at first. Eventually you get the hang of it. Endpoint. This is important. It's blank right now. This is how to tell the client how to reach us. So you would do something like router.company.com, and then it appears there. You could also do this as a straight up IP address. You can do that too. If it's at a specific port, which this one is, you'd want to do that. Then it has the port number in there. The name of this is just the name I believe that the configuration will be saved as. Pre-shared key, this is optional. You can add an additional key on the connection. I rarely use this, so I'm going to leave it blank. Keep alive interval. If you need your client to periodically ping your router in order to keep a tunnel open for NAT on the client side, then that's where this becomes useful. And WireGuard usually suggests 25. If you put that in, you can see it's added here to the configuration. I'm going to leave it out for the moment, because in this case, my client doesn't need to be reachable at all times from my network. I just want the client to be able to come in whenever they choose. DNS servers, if you're going to be using this in a corporate context, often you need to tell the client to use your corporate DNS servers. So you would do something like putting in a DNS server here, and you can tell it for what domain name it should be querying, like so. You can put multiple IP addresses in here. The text label on the end is the domain name for which those servers will be used. I think there's a way to do this for more than one, but I don't remember what it is because I haven't used it in too long. So this is the basics of how you can configure this up. And when it's to your liking, I'm going to take out the DNS because that's not necessary for this. You can store and generate next. Oh, the same thing here. No spaces. Okay, fine. There we go. All right. So this is just regenerated a whole lot of stuff, and now I remember what else I was going to configure. Allowed IPs. This is important. Allowed IPs functions for the client somewhat differently than it does on the server from the perspective of the network traffic. I've just made an absolute hash of explaining that. So let me backtrack and say that again, okay? From the client side, this allowed IPs says what IP addresses it will accept traffic from. And when sending, it acts as a routing table entry. So when you have, I'm going to take away the IPv6 one just to make this a little clearer. When you have 0.0.0.0/0, that is everything. Everything. So when the client wants to send traffic, this says, hey, for everything in the world, you want to use this WireGuard tunnel. And only this tunnel. Don't use anything else, just this VPN connection. That's called a full tunnel. And then when it receives traffic back, it'll say, is this from anything? Then I'm going to accept traffic from it through the tunnel. If you want to make this more restrictive, you can take this and set it to a single device. /32. You can set it to any sort of subnet whatsoever, whatever meets your requirements. If you have something like this /32 in here, to the client, it just says, if you want to send traffic to anything in the world, use your normal internet connection. But when you want to send to this one specific address, use the WireGuard VPN. Conversely, when receiving data through the tunnel, only accept traffic from this one address. So what I would actually do in this case is make sure that I also include the address of the router itself. So if I want to ping my client, I can do so. And then when the client wants to speak to something within the network, it can through the tunnel. You'll notice that the tunnel has to use a different subnet than the internal network. That is by design. That is how you want to do that. I also see where I have set up this endpoint address with the internal address of the LAN. That's not going to work either. What is my external address? My external address on this at the moment is actually 17.20. Cool. So as I change that, this is what it should look like. The endpoint is 17.20. That's our WAN address, not our LAN address. The tunnel address for this client would be 225.3. The allowed IPs are set here. Endpoint is good. Cool. I'm not going to save this configuration. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to peers. I'm going to look at my test client, and I'm going to modify the allowed IPs because the allowed IPs on the, well, I'm not going to modify the allowed IPs. The allowed IPs on the OPNsense is the reverse. If it's sending traffic to the client, I only want it to send traffic that's for that client. And when I'm receiving traffic from the client, I want to make sure that it is just from that client and not from other things that the client might be forwarding through. Or if you want to do, for example, a site-to-site tunnel, you can be more expansive. You can say, I want to send traffic for an entire subnet and receive traffic from an entire subnet. And then the other side is I want to send to the other subnet and receive from that subnet. Cool. There's multiple ways that you can set this up. Just the allowed IPs is a routing rule for sending and a firewall rule for receiving. It can feel really complicated, and indeed it can be complicated. I'm not even sure how well I'm explaining it. But there we go. And that's it. This will allow a client to come into the network through the firewall rule that we set up to reach the WireGuard instance. Then they will be able to connect to the VPN. They will be able to send traffic to something within that network. And it'll be able to receive the return traffic. What it won't be able to do currently is then turn around and go back out to the internet through this VPN connection. We just haven't set up the final pieces necessary for doing that. If we wanted to do that, we can. It's through NAT outbound. Right now, this will tell you, hey, if you're coming from WireGuard, you can go out. Cool. That's because I've currently got it on automatic outbound NAT rule generation. If I was using manual or hybrid, I might need to modify some of these rules. Right now, NAT outbound will work fine. But let's go back to rules for a second. These rules, there's nothing here. It'll all be blocked, including the stuff we want to permit. Clearly, I'm going to have to fix this, aren't I? All right. Source any. Let's not say source any. Let's say that this needs to come from the subnet of our WireGuard VPN. Okay. Destination. I can restrict it to a single host, or I could leave it as any. If I left it as any, it can turn around and go back out to the network, to the internet, I should say. If I wanted to restrict this, I could also restrict it to a particular source on this WireGuard interface. Our client on .2 is only supposed to be able to go to a single device. I can restrict that by source and then destination. If I want to be able to go turn around and go right back out to the internet, this would do the job. Anything from the entire subnet can go out to any place through the gateway, and that's good enough. Just taking a look at this. Yeah, there's also no ping, so I would also probably add a rule to allow ping. This is a demo system. It doesn't have all of my rules set up that I usually have and have put in over time. But it gives you a basis to start understanding how you can configure this. It's not actually, well, it's not actually too difficult if you've been working with networks for a while. If you haven't been working with networks for a little while, or you're trying to set it up at home, I understand it's daunting. Really, all of it is. But WireGuard is, to its credit, a lot simpler and a lot more forgiving than a lot of the other options out there. So it is highly recommended. All right, that's probably enough talking for today. So I hope that you found that useful, even though it was perhaps a little more circular than I had hoped. If you have any other thoughts on things you'd like me to talk about or things you'd like me to explain better, including this, hey, it's just not working. Can you actually explain that better? I will take another run at it if I need to. If you have any comments like that, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door NetAdmin, and we will see you next time.